All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to class 89, which is part one of a talk on a book that's rather lengthy. But as I looked over it, I was pleased with it. Some of my books I haven't read in many, many years. This was a book I wrote as a follow-up to The Purpose of Physical Reality. In fact, it has a subtitle called The Purpose of Physical Reality Part 2. It may take two classes, so that's why I'm calling it Part 1. So let me share my screen and we'll get started with the PowerPoint. And I wanted to show you some other things as well once we get into it. So the titled The Arc of Ascent Part 1, Class 89. There's the book cover, which I did not like at all, to be frank with you. They didn't consult me about it, but there it is. And I'll tell you a funny story about it. You see the little circle here. Well, symbolically, I presume the cover artist meant for this to be the soul ascending. Well, in the first place, it's curving the wrong way. Remember, the Arc of Ascent goes, as we'll see here, it goes from the point of deepest descent up to the Arc of Ascent. So it should be curving inward. Well, the cover, they made it curve this way. Then a funny thing happened. The first time when the book came out, I was giving a talk in Colorado. So they had just gotten the books in and they were selling them. And they presumed that this little dot, I don't know if you remember, but the books used to have little circular stickers you could put the price on. And so everybody started writing the price on the sticker. So I jokingly said that this was the worth of the soul, the human soul, at any rate. So much for that. Now, this is something I wanted to show you because some of you said that you could not find this book. And one thing good about publishing with the Baha'i publishers is they, for the most part, the books are always available. Whereas if you publish with a university press or another press, they will what they call pulp the book when the sales curve is gone, when the major part of the sales have gone down. Pulp the book means they grind them up. Now, why did they do that? Well, a law was passed about 30 years ago, which deprived publishers of being able to have a tax relief or discount for the books they had in warehouse. So in effect, it did them no good. So once the sales had were no longer active, they would literally grind them up and make new books with the results. Now with the publish on demand, that's not a problem. But at any rate, I wanted to show you just briefly, there are three main places you can buy my books, and this is true with most Baha'i books. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to share with you here. Let me, that's not what I wanted. Let me go to this. This is the George Ronald site. And so if you go to the bookstore and you see all titles, and you'll see that on down here, they're in alphabetical order. The Arc of Ascent is here, and it's available for $23.95, but only in the U.S. Some other of my books are with them as well, and I'll tell you about those when we get to them. Then the website that I have, www.johnshatcher.com, this is the home page on that, the life, works, and online courses of Professor John S. Hatcher. If you can go up here and go to books, or you can go down here to quick links and go to books. And then this is a book we're going to be dealing with after the Arc of Ascent. So you can have them arranged in sorted by alphabetical order or whatever. So you go to the book, and so the first one here is A Sense of History, and it will show you the sites that you can click on to buy the book. All right, so the only place that I've got listed here is the George Reynolds site, and it goes directly to that, and so on. All right, so let me stop sharing my screen again. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm doing the wrong thing here. I'll get it. And all right, now tell me if, am I back on the PowerPoint now? Lisa Marie? Unmute yourself and let me know.
Yes, we can see it is showing.
Okay, thank you very much. Lisa Marie is in what part of California?
Southern California, the Los Angeles area.
Okay, and she is a very fine writer and is helping me as long as she can to keep track of admitting people and doing what was done at first by Alex Knobler, who now with the second child can no longer has the spare time to do that. All right, so you can, and this is the guidance on the slide on how to go to my site and where to go to look for how to purchase the books. So we began then with what we talked about yesterday, what the Arc of Ascent means. But what you need to do if you really want to get a sense of, because this is something that took me a long time to get understand exactly what they meant, these arcs of descent and ascent. And where these are discussed at length and explained at length is in chapter 81 of Some Answered Questions. And it's chapter 81 in both the 1981 edition and the more recently translated 2014 edition, which is preferable because even though the changes are very minimal, they clarify some things that may have been vague or needed a different word in the older version. So the first section of the Arc of Ascent, and the main theme we're going to discuss tonight, is the interface or collaborative relationship between the twin aspects of reality. Now, what those are, so far as we know, are the physical and the spiritual. And as we've discussed so often before, the spiritual is, from a Baha'i perspective, the real world. And this world, the physical world, is, as Abdul Baha says, its shadow stretching out like an image on the water. It's, in effect, this world, as we said in our discussion of the purpose of physical reality, a metaphorical expression in concrete forms of the spiritual world and its attributes, and a place, therefore, where we can have concrete examples of these abstract concepts that we may learn from them. So I don't need to repeat that. If you want to hear it discussed in length, go back to the other classes that we dealt with on the purpose of physical reality. So we're going to see how these twin aspects of reality are expressed in all sorts of places in the Baha'i writings. And here, this section is divided into chapters on the components of human purpose, which, if you'll remember from our discussion of the Tabi Agdas, are to know God and to worship God, or to put another way, to recognize God through his manifestations and to be obedient to them. So we have these twin aspects or twin duties of knowing and worshiping, or to put more broadly, knowledge put into action. And so we learn, and those two things are reciprocal. If you'll remember, in that opening paragraph of the Kitabi Agdas, Baha'u'llah says, neither is acceptable without the other. So it's not enough to know what you should do, or to know about spiritual reality, or to know spiritual concepts. You need to put them into practice to complete, to complete that circle. And so far as the arcs of descent and ascent are concerned, you complete that circle by that. And what we're going to see later in our discussion tonight is these are reciprocal and collaborative. So in other words, you first learn about injustice by seeing it portrayed for you out on the streets of our country, for example, or in any thousands of other ways, with this a personal relationship, a familial relationship. Someone betrays you, someone does an injustice to you, or someone does justice to you, and you begin to see the concept borne out, and then the abstract notion that, my dear, was injustice, or that was unjust of you, or that was very just of you. And you learn from the experience, and then the learning will expand as you put it into practice, and you have this ascent that we'll talk about later tonight. So you have these twin duties, and what I call the art of salvation. In one important discussion in this book that we'll discuss tonight, I call these the male and female, or female and male principles of complementarity. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, let's get to it. We'll get to it later on. We'll get to it when we talk about let me see, where is it? The wineskin, Adam and Eve is what I'm looking for. Well, anyway, we'll get to it when we get to it. That the female in the Adamic myth represents, or Eve, represents the soul. This is one interpretation. As Abdu'l-Baha says, this is a parable or a fable, even though there was a figure, a historical figure named Adam, who was a manifestation of God. But the concept of Adam and Eve, as commonly understood in Genesis, is a symbolic story, or a fable, or a parable, or an analogy. And in this respect, the male Adam represents the body of man, and the female Eve is his becoming aware of his soul. And you'll see how that works out as we get on into our discussion. So the complementarity between them is, again, Eve is the source of guidance, is the source of knowledge and understanding, and the male aspect of our being, our physical selves, carries out that guidance for good or ill. And so each is complementary to the other. So the next thing, or the sort of the major theme of this book in using that bifurcation of the self, that dual aspect of the self between the spirit and the body. Another major theme related to that is the social imperative in personal salvation or growth. And that is, you cannot develop spiritually, and we've just said this before in other classes, but you alone by yourself, that virtues, almost every one of them by definition, with a few exceptions, such as piety and prayer and dedication and meditation and so on, which are more actions than virtues, but they're also parts of virtue. Those are between you and God. But most of the virtues we talk about, such as being just, being fair, being kind, being forgiving, being loving, these are meaningless without relationships. You cannot understand them, and you cannot act on them, and you cannot expand your appreciation of them. And so we see that is confirmed by the sciences. And what I'm talking about there is that if you take a child that has been, for some unusual circumstances, born in the wild without parents, being abandoned or raised by wolves or something like this, and they're rare stories of what are called feral children. But what we find is with most of these children is not only are they unable to relate to the human experience, they are doomed to die quite early, and they never learn language. They have been deprived of that initial socialization. But of course, socialization is part of as I've said before, and I'll say it several times, from my point of view, and it's strictly my idea insofar as discussing this very complex subject, but I think of the community as the God particle of a planetary society. And I say it's the God particle, you'd think, well, isn't the community composed of families? So surely the family is the God particle. But no, the family really can't develop properly within itself. It needs to reach out and be part of a larger expression. That's just my idea. You can agree with it or not. Then the seven valleys, of course, is sort of a paradigm for achieving selflessness in a contemporary environment. And that is, you have the valley of search, the valley of love, where you are attracted to something you find worthy of your search, and then you achieve knowledge of what it is that you are attracted to, and so on. And so you have this ascent in this allegory of a journey through seven valleys that are ever more refined expressions of human attainment, so that by the end of it, the last valley is of true poverty and utter nothingness, which sounds negative when you think of it, but what it's talking about, of course, Baha'u'llah is referring to the fact that the more yourself is reliant on, collaborating with, and in love with all of your fellow human beings, and participating in this global project, and ultimately in the spiritual world, an even vaster vision of that. The more, so in other words, detachment and selflessness from a Baha'i point of view are the highest thing you strive for. But it doesn't mean you've lost yourself. It means, in effect, you fulfilled yourself. A wheel within a wheel. And of course, this is talking about the various cyclical paradigms in history that we've talked about so much before. You have the concept of the progressive revelation, where you see each dispensation or era as a cycle. You see what's called a universal cycle, which is a cycle of dispensations. We've gone through one that we know of, though Abdu'l-Baha says there were many, many before us on this planet, but they're simply lost to our collective memory because there's no record of them. So with this is one sense that Muhammad is talking about when he says he's the seal of the prophet. He's the last prophet in the prophetic cycle or Abrahamic cycle. And then the Bab is the first manifestation in the cycle of Baha, or the Baha'i cycle. So we have these various, you have a community is a cycle, the earth itself as a planet is going through various cycles of growth and development. So you have these cycles in human history of going from a dispensation to a universal cycle to ultimately you have the completion, as it were, of what is called the golden age of Baha'u'llah, which we've talked about at length before. Now, we return in this section to the idea of the collaboration between these twin aspects of what each manifestation brings. And that is, as we said before, each manifestation brings two sorts of teachings. He brings the new spiritual teachings, or the new expression of spiritual teachings, because spirituality and spiritual concepts don't change. They just become ever more completely understood. And so you say the spiritual teachings don't change, but they become expressed in a more refined way. And so that's the new wine, if you will, of the manifestation. And the wine skin is the retainer, or the administrative order, the laws, the social ordinances, and as well as the institutions that the manifestation brings. And of course, this analogy, this metaphor, comes from Christ's statement that you can't put new wine in old skin. So in other words, he was saying to the Jews, this is a new revelation. If we retain the Jewish hierarchy and priesthood and so forth, it won't work. We need a new church, a new structure. Now, here's where we get to the Adam and Eve analogy in this regard. Of the collaborative aspect, again, of the ascent of the individual and society, with the alliance or collaboration or reciprocal relationship between the soul and the body, or between the new wine and the new skin, between spiritual concepts and social development. You can't have one without the other. So even as this axiom applies to the individual, it also applies to society. We can have all the best intentions in the world, certainly the American Constitution and so forth, contain great intention, but putting them into creative action, that's a harder thing, as we're finding out even today. So what is meant here in this discussion, this section about their getting divorced? Well, what I am talking about is that you have a schism in the modern world between spiritual belief and social action. You see this, or I did when I was growing up, when I would observe what I called the Sunday self of those in my church, and then their workaday self, where a whole different panoply of standards and ethics were used. So you could be as ruthless as you wanted in the world of business, but at church you were a prayerful, pious, loving individual. And so you have this split between both the spiritual teachings. And of course, now you don't really have a standard accepted spiritual principle that applies to everyone in our society. But you have this, as we discussed many classes ago, about Islam. At the very death of Muhammad, you have the schism between the institution he had intended and the spiritual teachings of the Quran. And so it was sort of, in one sense, doomed from the outset, though it still had an incredible influence on the spiritual and social evolution and scientific evolution of human understanding. So the choice wine at the family reunion is actually a paper from a paper I gave, but it's a section of the book where I'm talking about the new wine, the choice wine, which is a term that Baha'u'llah used to refer to the Kitab-i-Igan. And if you'll remember, those of you who've read the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the Book of Laws, he says at the beginning, think not that this is a mere code of laws. No, with the fingers of might and power, we have unsealed the choice wine. So the new wine, in this sense, which is interestingly, as we've discussed before, in Persian, a more poetic language, is the new wine, the new information, the concept of progressive revelation spelled out very particularly, and the concept of the nature or ontology of the manifestation is spelled out. Those are the two main themes. And that's why the book is divided into two parts. And so the new wine is the Igan, and the opening of that wine is the application of that spiritual teaching in the laws and institutions that Baha'u'llah establishes in the Kitab-i Aqdas. And the family reunion is my attempt at a pun or some humor. But the reunion of the family, meaning Adam and Eve getting back together again, or the family of man getting together again, even as the institution is now in synchronization with the spiritual teachings. And then I trace, and we've done this before, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now, but there is a lot of detail in the book. From the lesser peace to a golden age, the stages in the evolution of a world commonwealth, and this has to do with the birth of a global identity, which we've already achieved, I think, some time ago. We're well aware that you can't have one state being at war or being warred upon, and everybody else just sits back and does their own thing. We are economically an interdependent global community, and we are, in every other sense, becoming aware of the global nature of our society. The lesser peace, as we discussed, will emerge, but only as a secular stage or step in the advancement towards a planetary government such as Baha'u'llah has described and prescribed in great detail. The stage of establishment we discussed a few classes ago is a stage actually before the lesser peace, but it is a stage, after the lesser peace, but it is a stage where the secular government of the lesser peace chooses the Baha'i faith as the state religion of that secular government. And then in the last, is this the last section? No, there's one more. The kingdom come, a model of the Baha'i commonwealth. I talk about the various aspects of the structure of the Baha'i commonwealth. This is something we discussed a couple of classes ago, both the secular commonwealth and the Baha'i commonwealth. And this is something that is very exciting to study in the writings of Shoghi Effendi, what that society will be like. And in fact, what's fun, I think, is to read through the synopsis of the laws of Baha'u'llah and imagine the society that is being described. It's quite delightful. And you would love to live in that society. And as Paul Lample, a member of the House of Justice, has said, we would love to live in that age and experience that, even though it's not the end of our development, it's the beginning, the golden age of Baha'u'llah, the beginning that will not be followed by night. We will never regress from that planetary society. And as he says, you may wish you were in that time and in that society, but alas, we are in the formative age, and it's our job to bring that about for the future. And that's what that term, the prospect of the future, means. The ark is metaphor we've dealt with before. It's sort of three different meanings: the ark of the covenant, the ark of the buildings, the far-flung ark on Mount Carmel, which is the administrative structure, and then the ark, which is the boat described in the Tablet of the Holy Mariner, which also represents the covenant. And then finally, the heart of the commonwealth, the tribal ethos. Now, this is a very, and even though I wrote this a long time ago, it's particularly relevant to this day and in the Baha'i faith. Those of you who are familiar with the 9-year plan, that's what is being described and has been what we've been working at in the Baha'i community for the last 20 years, and that is building a super state by beginning at the local level, because you can't mandate spiritual transformation of the individual of the community. You can't just say, okay, be spiritual. You've got to have the practices worked out locally, and then while the administrative structure is guiding it from above, the work is being done at the grassroots level. And I call it a tribal perspective or ethos because many of the more salient and more salutary aspects of a tribal community, and of course, a tribal community in one sense is very ancient and very unsophisticated, but in some ways it's very sophisticated, and particularly the unity of the family, the unity of the community, the caring for each other, the relegation of various chores, and so on. So it's a tribal ethos in the sense that we want to build communities that have that same sort of love and harmony and unity. And the tools to do that are not only spelled out by Baha'u'llah, but also from the House of Justice in the particular agencies it's prescribed and described and brought into being to bring about these, the clusters, for example, which are being continually re-examined and refined, the agencies that serve the cluster, and so on. So if you think about this, or even buy the book and read this, you'll see a lot of similarities between this concept and what is being discussed in the letters and concepts of the 9-year plan as described in the letters from the House of Justice. Now, we get back to, so basically I've stated the outline of the book and the main themes, the ascent of the individual as a social project, or and the bifurcation, or that's not a good word, but the collaboration of these two aspects of reality as paralleled in the individual and in the society itself. So you have Adam as a prophet. This again is going over what I've already said, but Adam and Eve's story as a myth or a parable, the physical evolution of man as Adam. And it's very interesting. In this book, I go into great detail explaining this parable in Genesis, how it's explained twice. One is clearly explaining the evolution of man on this planet, or seems to be, and the other is talking about the awareness, the time where humankind becomes aware of its own spirit, its own consciousness. And that's where Eve comes in. So you would say between the two, Eve is the more important aspect of humankind in this myth. And this is always true for the most part, whether in Sufi poetry and in the scriptures, that the female represents the spiritual aspect of man, of humankind. So we have the female, the maiden that appears to Baha'u'llah in the Sia Chal, representing the Holy Spirit. Satan, of course, as the Baha'i writings say, is not a real figure, but in this story represents the temptations of the self, the exaltation of the self and the temptation for worldly things. And of course, Adam and Eve break the law of God by partaking of the tree of knowledge. And it is Eve's idea, notice, it's her idea to do it, because, again, she represents the conscious mind. And Adam follows along because the body will do what the mind determines it wants to do. And is where the symbolic relevance of the two punishments in Genesis are very interesting. The punishment for Adam is that he will earn his living and by labor, by the sweat of his brow, and Eve will bring forth her children in pain. Now, again, this is not literal. This is the idea that humankind must, we must labor physically to provide for ourselves. So what are the children of Eve? Well, if Eve represents the mind and the spirit, the children of the mind are ideas and concepts, and the pain. In other words, we'll have to struggle to understand. This is my interpretation, and you can take it for what it's worth. So these complementary aspects of reality are, as I have implied, you can find them in everything we think and do. You have spiritual reality and physical reality as twin aspects of the universe. Well, not the universe in particular, because the universe usually implies the physical reality, but spiritual reality and metaphysical reality. And physical reality, the soul and the body, the spiritual teachings and the laws and administration, knowledge, action, Eve, Adam, the book of certitude, the most holy book, the new wine skin. Now, here's something I hope you'll find interesting. I did when I first attempted it many years ago at my university. There was a senior seminar that all students were required to take, and it was the last thing they had to take, and it was really a brilliant idea, but it was a seminar where people from all different curricula would meet, and it was simply pass-fail. All you had to do to pass was attend the class. But it became, for me, one of the most exciting classes I ever taught, and I think for my students it did. I called it the deterioration of society and the search for an integrating principle. And one of the things that we would talk about the most important problems of the day, whether it was the changing of the climate, whether it was the equality of women and men, and so on. Well, the equality of women and men was a very hot subject when it still is, but particularly then. This was in the early 70s. And so I tried an experiment with the class. I put on the I was going to say a whiteboard, but we didn't have whiteboards then. It was on a blackboard. It was actually a green board. I said, I want you to list for me what are traditional male attributes. Now, you may not agree that these are just male attributes or these are good things, but just things, qualities that people commonly in popular culture associate with maleness. And so they did, and this is a sample of the kinds of things they came up with. The man is rational, reserved, unemotional, physically strong, ideally, vengeful, the breadwinner for the family, remote from the children. It's just, as I say, these aren't good things, but there's just the, father knows best kind of thing. Head of the family, the disciplinarian, and wait till your father gets home. Remember that line if you've seen a few TV shows from that time. Well, and so then I had them cover those up, and I said, now give me female attributes. Intuitive, outgoing, emotional, weaker, forgiving, homemaker, teacher of children, peacemaker of the family, source of love and affection. Now, on the one hand, these are obviously, I've put positive things, and they would put more negative things, insofar as being too emotional, being irrational. So in other words, instead of rational, they would have put irrational. Now, and then I said, okay, now I covered these up. And I said, I want you to make a list of if you had to live on a desert island with one person, who would it be? Or what kind of person would it be? Give me the attributes of such a person. And so, ideal mate or friend. Rational, but open with emotions, accessible, but not overbearing, and so on. A balanced response to stress, educated and resourceful, capable of supporting the family, loving with the children, collaborative and consultative, and so on. And of course, what you end up with is the precise combination or synthesis of the male and the female. And so, as has been talked about a great deal, we have the male and female aspects of our own being, whether we are male or female. And we want to develop them all. And so the ideal human being and companion becomes metaphorically the marriage of Eve and Adam. Knowledge and action. And again, I talked about the distinct punishments for Adam and Eve. Eve will bear her children in pain. Adam will sweat and labor for their food. And Adam will die. His sin is death. And of course, the body does. But the Eve in us lives on. Well, that's one interpretation. As I say, Abdu'l-Baha gives his own and says there are many other valid interpretations of that myth, but it's important to the theme of this work in the dual aspects of reality, the spiritual realm, the physical realm, which is a mirror image of the spiritual realm. But they are inseparable dimensions of a single unified reality. So we talk about the spiritual world or the physical world and the spiritual world as if they are two distinct, different universes or realities. And the writings make it clear that no, they are really both existent at the same time. And the only distinction between the two is we are veiled from being able to withhold the one while we are experiencing the first, the physical reality. All creation emanates from the will of God. There is only one universe. Now, there are theories now, and I'm going to discuss this in a later class, called the fear of infinity. There are various discussions now. Another one came out today with another view on the Webb telescope that discovered some faraway galaxies. And so one of the theories of, is the universe infinite or not? Well, the Baha'i writings say all over the place that it is infinite in time and space and plenitude. But some theorists, cosmologists have come up with the idea, well, maybe there's more than one universe. Well, of course, what they're talking about are subsets of the totality of existence. When we use the term, and when I say we, when I use the term and what I infer the Baha'i writings mean by the term is the universe consists of everything that exists in the physical world. And we'll get to some of those theories and why some of them work, some of them don't. So as I say, the universe, as I understand it from the Baha'i writings, is infinite in time, space, and plenitude. And we'll show the arguments for that. So the dual aspects of human nature, the essential reality, the soul is the source of reason, self-awareness, will, reflection, meditation, The physical self carries out the desires of the soul in action, reflects in outward actions, including speech, the nature of the soul. Baha'u'llah spends a lot of time talking about the Guardian in one book, I think it's The Advent of Divine Justice, spends many pages talking about a chaste and holy life, and he talks about how how we dress ourselves, how we comport ourselves, how we speak. All of these are actions that reflect and assist the evolution of our soul. The body becomes a means by which the soul can practice abstract concepts, such as cleanliness, courtesy, justice, piety. And again, the dual aspect of every revelation, this goes back to the first of the thing tonight about the spiritual teachings and the social teachings. Neither is acceptable without the other. They are reciprocal, they are interdependent, they are inseparable, they are progressive. So I will show you some of what's to come, but we need to stop here. Spiritual development is necessarily a social progress. Well, here we can do this much. A very spiritual and learned hermit living alone in a cave. It's a beautiful painting. And we would think I would like to be that man. And yet Baha'u'llah here tells the monks and the monastics, don't seclude yourselves in churches and cloisters. Come out of them by my leave, and busy then yourselves with what will profit you and others. Thus commandeth you he who is the Lord of the day of reckoning. Seclude yourselves in the stronghold of my love. This truly is the seclusion that benefiteth you, could ye but know it. He that secludeth himself in his house is indeed as one dead. So he forbids monasticism and asceticism and mendicancy. So here's a contrast to the man in the cave, a struggling strawberry picker who supports his 3 children and whose wife works with him in the fields. And I see this right across the street where there's a couple of 100 acres of strawberry fields, and the Mexican migrant workers are brought in by bus every day, even on the weekends. And what's interesting to me is how this ties in with this Persian hidden word. This is the last hidden word. The best of men are they that earn a livelihood by their calling and spend upon themselves and upon their kindred for the love of God, the Lord of the worlds. So we hear often this phrase, and it's accurate, that work when done in service is equivalent to prayer. Well, that's true, but work, period, earning a livelihood is equivalent to prayer. And this is a hallmark of the best of men. And that's why Baha'u'llah mandates that everyone have a vocation. And then I'll end with the Alabama story. This is a picture that I could have taken, and I've done a painting of this. What gets me is the arched backs. That's all you see. You look out and you see a whole field of arched backs. What's more, once they get to the end of a row and they have picked the strawberries, they run back to the truck to get another box. Now, why do they run? Nobody's whipping them or anything, but they know that the more boxes they get, the more they earn. Now, the Alabama story is that at one point a few years ago, they were trying to forbid migrant, unregistered citizens working in the fields. And so they tried to hire normal Americans, so-called, to do this work. They couldn't find anyone capable of doing this work because it looks like it's just manual labor. It's very skillful. You've got to know which berries are ready, which berries are not, how to pick them without injuring them, et cetera, et cetera. It's a skilled labor. And so they immediately reversed their decision not to hire the migrants because all their crops were lying in the field and being destroyed. This says a lot, and it would say a lot more if you can actually, if you have an occasion, see this in action. It's a remarkable thing. And what's remarkable to me, because I have a bad back, is that all the time their backs are in that arched position. It's just amazing to me what incredible people these are. Well, and this is the last slide. So this is how it ascends. You begin with the concept, or maybe you begin with the action. And then you begin with a higher level of action. And then you return to the level of thought, and you put that thought, that concept of love, in action. And so you ascend in your understanding of what love is about, how it is put into action, until ultimately you love the whole of humankind. There's a beautiful passage, I didn't put it in here, but we'll see if I can remember to do it next time, about love. And to put it simply, Abdu'l-Baha says that love is the organizing force of the human world, of the spiritual world. It's equivalent to the magnetic force in the physical world, that without it, there would be chaos. So if you think of going back to pre-new physics with the Newtonian concept of the mutual attraction of masses, which orders Newton's world, that attraction, that mutual attraction, is what organizes the spiritual world, is that attraction of one soul to another.